Thanks very much. As you can see, our guests are online. Abeer Etefa, the senior spokeswoman for the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe of the World Food Programme, and Juliette Touma, the director of communications for the UN Relief and Works Agency, and they'll talk to you about the current situation on the ground. First, we'll lead with Abeer Etefa, who is speaking to you from Cairo. Ms. Etefa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. Good evening, everyone from Cairo, Egypt, and good afternoon for you. Well, thank you for having me on this briefing on behalf of the World Food Programme. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are becoming more desperate every day in the search for bread and other essential foods. We are already starting to see cases of dehydration and malnutrition, which is increasing rapidly and by the day. So Gaza actually risks sliding into hunger hell without fuel and rapid surge in food supplies. With only 10% of necessary food supplies entering in Gaza since the beginning of this conflict, we're now facing a massive food gap. So 2.2 million people, that's nearly the entire population of Gaza, are now in need of food assistance. People are barely able to have a meal a day. Food options are limited to canned food if it is actually available. Bread is a rare luxury, and aid trucks are trickling into Gaza, but even the small amounts of food and water that make it over the border are barely able to be transported to where it needs to go, as roads have been damaged or fuel is in very short supply. The existing food systems in Gaza are basically collapsing. Food production has come to an almost complete halt. Markets have collapsed. Fishermen cannot access the sea. Farmers cannot reach their farms. And the last bakery that the World Food Programme has been working with has closed its door because of the shortage of fuel. Shops have run out of food supplies. The bakeries are unable to operate because of the fuel, shortage of clean water, or because they have sustained damage. And the last mill that was also operating to make the wheat flour that's needed for baking bread has been hit and stopped operating. This has all halted the supply of bread, which is the last staple food for people in Gaza. And with gas and electricity in desperate supply, many people are using wood to cook or to make bread, and perishable food is not really an option at all because there is no electricity to keep items refrigerated. And the World Food Programme was working since the beginning of this conflict with UNRWA and with 23 bakeries at the start of this emergency, and have been providing fresh bread for 200,000 people in shelters every morning. This is now over because of all of the 23 bakeries are now out of service. Before the crisis, there were around 130 bakeries all around Gaza. More than 11 have been hit by airstrikes and destroyed, including one that was contracted by WFP, and the rest are barely working because of the shortage again of fuel. In general, 25% of the shops in Gaza, those ones that have been contracted by WFP, remain open, and others have run out of essential food items. But even the ones that remain open have very limited supplies in the stores. The local markets have shut down completely. Small quantities of food can be found, but they are being sold, of course, at alarmingly inflated prices and are of little use without fuel and cooking gas. And that's forcing people to survive on maybe one meal a day. That's if they are lucky to find this meal. And for the lucky one, this meal will include maybe canned food. It could be some people have actually resorted to consuming raw onions, uncooked eggplants, whatever they can get their hands on. The trickle of humanitarian assistance that has been getting into Gaza in no way makes up for the commercial halt of, for the halt of the commercial food imports. Of the 1,129 trucks that have entered Gaza up till Tuesday or Wednesday, since the opening of the Rafah border crossing point on the 21st of October, only 447 were carrying food supplies. And while WFP welcomes the increase in the number of the trucks crossing into Gaza, the volume remains very inadequate. So just to give you an idea, on daily basis, more than 400 trucks were crossing into Gaza on daily basis, carrying all kinds of commodities that's important for people to have a life in Gaza. That number today, we have less than 100 trucks going on, and out of these 100 trucks, around 10% are probably for food commodity. That means that the food that has entered Gaza so far is only enough to meet 7% of the people's daily minimum of the caloric needs. With winter fast approaching and the unsafe and overcrowded shelters, the lack of clean water, people are facing the immediate possibility of starvation. Here is what the World Food Programme has provided so far. So since early October, WFP has reached around 764,000 people in Gaza and the West Bank through the distribution of ready-to-eat food, in-kind food parcels, and electronic vouchers. We've assisted almost 500,000 people in UN shelters with bread and canned tuna or the nutritionally dense date bars. In Gaza, we have provided more than 520,000 people with the monthly electronic vouchers, and that was at the beginning of the crisis. And people have redeemed these vouchers throughout October, but they are deemed useless now because even if you have vouchers, there are nothing in the shops that would help. People can find it useful to buy in terms of food commodities. We have no option but to rely on the ready-to-eat food parcels, and because there is no cooking gas or clean water available. And these are some of the constant worries that we hear. There are a lot of worries that we hear from people when they contact us through the interagency hotline that's operated by the World Food Programme. And we have so far logged more than 40,000 calls for people saying that they don't have food to eat. All of this, of course, would not have been possible without the partnership that we have with UNRWA, who have been doing heroic work on the ground. And of course, condolences and to all our colleagues who have lost their lives in UNRWA. So the World Food Programme plans to scale up and reach 1 million people by December in Gaza through in-kind food and nutrition, and providing also nutrition commodities. But to meet the growing needs inside Gaza, we have to increase the number of trucks that are crossing, carrying food assistance. We have to have access through multiple border crossing points and not just through Rafah. We need more than just one crossing point. We need the safe access for humanitarian aid workers to distribute assistance and for the civilians to have safe access to this assistance, fuel for trucks, fuel for bakeries so that we can continue to provide this staple food commodity and to be operational, and of course, connectivity to facilitate the delivery of assistance and the ability to rotate staff in and out of Gaza so that we can beef up our capacity on the ground and give relief to the people who have been working for the last few weeks tirelessly. There is no way to meet the current hunger needs with the current situation. We have to have a different space that allows us to have this safe access and to have the flowing of goods inside Gaza. The collapse of food supply chains is catastrophic. It's a catastrophic turning point in an already very dire situation. Gaza was not an easy place to live in before 7 of October. if the situation was difficult before this conflict, it's now disastrous. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Abeer. And now we'll turn the floor over to Juliette Touma, the Director of Communications for the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East. Juliette is speaking from Amman. Juliette, over to you.
Thank you, Farhan, and thank you, my friend and colleague Abeer. It's good to see you, albeit the very, very bad and harsh circumstances we are all going through. Before I begin, Farhan, I would like to share the last message that we were able to get from the teams in Gaza. You may be aware that Gaza is now undergoing a fourth communications blackout, and as a result, there will not be a cross-border aid operation at the Rafah crossing tomorrow morning. The communications network in Gaza is down because there is no fuel, and this makes it impossible to manage or coordinate humanitarian aid convoys. This came through from our colleagues in Gaza. It has been almost 6 weeks of hell for the people of Gaza, 6 weeks since the abhorrent attack in Israel, 6 weeks of total disregard for international humanitarian law. Today, Gaza looks like it's been hit by an earthquake, except it's man-made and it could have been totally avoided. We have just witnessed in the past week the largest displacement of Palestinians since 1948. This was an exodus under our watch, a river of people being forced to flee their homes. Some were forced to relive the unlivable, traumas from the past, mostly unhealed. Others, the younger generation, were forced to live through traumas of ancestors or parents, while other communities are survivors of 1948 who were never displaced until November this year. This week, our teams reported people arriving after hours and hours of walking. They were dehydrated, hungry, exhausted, and shell-shocked. Many asked, what next? Where do I go now? Unlike in other global conflicts in recent years, the people of Gaza are trapped in an enclave with no way out. The enclave has now shrunk by half. Many continue to flock to UNRWA shelters, where we are hosting more than 800,000 people. The dignity of people has been stripped overnight. Let's just imagine what this means for a human being. Children in the shelters are pleading for a sip of water and a piece of bread. Some of these children used to study in the very same school that became their shelters. People are telling us they must queue for 2 to 3 hours just to go to the toilet. They share one toilet with hundreds of others. All of this brings us back to the medieval age. On the latest on the situation on the ground and a chance to address some misinformation, we reiterate at UNRWA that nowhere and no place is safe in the Gaza Strip. Not the north, not the south, and not the middle areas. Of my colleagues who were killed, 1/3 of them were killed in the middle and southern areas. Of the nearly 70 UNRWA facilities impacted, the vast majority was actually not in the north. So there's no place that is safe in the Gaza Strip, let alone a safe zone anywhere in Gaza. At least 103 UNRWA colleagues were killed. This is the number that we were able to confirm. The actual number is likely to be much higher. We have lost contact with many of our staff, and we worry that some of them are still under the rubble. These were our colleagues. They had nothing to do with this conflict. They were civil servants of the United Nations, dedicated to serving their community. They are dead now. Last Monday, the UN declared half-mast to remember them around the world, except in Gaza, where our colleagues felt strongly that the best way to honor these colleagues is through our humanitarian response. Many of those colleagues were killed with their families. Dr. Sireen was a gynecologist. She was killed with her daughter. Sireen was one of very few women health specialists in the Gaza Strip. Our colleagues and all other civilians killed in Gaza, they're not statistics or updates. They are people. They could have been you. They could have been me, members of our families. We'd like to reiterate that UNRWA does not divert humanitarian assistance, nor have parties to the conflict looted or stole our supplies. We have a robust system of aid delivery, monitoring, and evaluation. And finally, on the issue of fuel, to what Abeer said, let me just compliment. UNRWA is not able to uphold the commitments to provide for the Palestinian people any longer. We see this as a deliberate attempt to strangle our operations and paralyze UNRWA. For weeks on end, we have pleaded for urgent deliveries of fuel. Yesterday, we finally got a shipment of fuel that was conditional to be used only for the transport of aid trucks, only for the transport of aid trucks coming from Egypt. We could not use that fuel for any other humanitarian purposes, including for our own operations, for medical facilities or water stations. As a result, 70% of people in Gaza do not have drinking water. In Rafah, in the south of the Gaza Strip, as one example, raw sewage has started flowing in the streets. We're not able to give the little aid that has been received through these trucks that my colleague Abeer referred to people who need it most, because we simply do not have the fuel to transport that aid. It is simply outrageous that humanitarian agencies are reduced to begging for fuel. I'll turn very quickly to the situation in the occupied West Bank, because we should not forget the plight of the Palestinian people in the West Bank, including in East Jerusalem. Long before October 7, the West Bank was especially violent, including in Palestine refugee camps. Only since the 7th of October, 44 Palestinian children have been killed. We have just returned from a visit to the Shurfat refugee camp, where I had the honor to accompany the UNRWA Commissioner General. The staff there, our colleagues, they told us they lived in constant uncertainty, worry, and fear amid Israeli forces' operations. And just after our visit, another operation forced UNRWA to evacuate schools in the camp, which affected 600 boys and girls. And before closing, just a few asks, and then happy to take your questions. We need a ceasefire now, if we want to save whatever is left of our humanity. In fact, it's long overdue. A fuel must be delivered without any conditions or delays for the humanitarian operations across the Gaza Strip. Anything less than our minimum needs would be cruel. Without it, 2 million people will be deprived of services and humanitarian assistance. The siege on Gaza, finally, must be lifted, and humanitarian and commercial supplies should flow in a regular and predictable basis. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll now turn the floor over for questions. For all those asking questions, please indicate to whom you're directing a question. First question goes to Edith Lederer.
Thank you both of you very much from the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. You both painted a dire, near catastrophic situation. One of the Israeli spokespeople said today that he didn't know why there was a problem with water because water was going in, and the Israelis seem to think that there's enough food in Gaza. Are you in direct contact with the Israelis about trying to certainly get food, water, and especially fuel into Gaza? Thank you. And how do you respond to those statements that there is water and food in Gaza?
Back over to you.
Who's the question for Farhan?
I think, Juliette, would you like to take a crack at that?
Yeah, sure, I can try. Thanks so much for the question, and good to see you. Look, what we do know at the moment across the Gaza Strip is that 70% of people do not have access to clean water. That we know for sure. There's 800,000 people who have come to seek refuge and protection in UNRWA shelters, more than 150 of them. They are lacking the basics. Like I said to you in my briefing, they are asking us for the very, very minimum, a piece of bread and a sip of water. We are not able at UNRWA to provide for these people because we ran out of supplies. We ran out of supplies early on in this war for a very simple reason, is that when we planned for the worst, we planned for only 1/4 of what we have now in our shelters. We planned for 150,000 people only as a worst case scenario. So we ran out of supplies very, very quickly. And then the siege started very early on. The siege meant that from the 7th of October until the 21st of October, not one sack of flour came into the Gaza Strip, not one drop of water. And that made the humanitarian operation far, far more challenging. Before the crisis began, 1.2 million people in the Gaza Strip relied on food assistance from UNRWA alone. I'm sure Abeer can give us the numbers on WFP. 1.2 million people out of 2.2 million people. The levels of poverty were among the highest in the region. 4 in 5 people in Gaza lived in poverty. The levels of unemployment among young people were among the highest, if not the highest, in the region and in the world. So this is the situation before the war started. Now with the war and the very tight siege and the heavy bombardment and the displacement, a humanitarian situation that was already very, very bad was made much, much worse. And in this war, water and food and fuel were used as weapons of war. Thank you.
Nabil Abisab.
Thank you, Nabil Abisab, Al Arabi TV station. My question is to Juliette, please. So we see and we hear a lot of Palestinians saying now that they are experiencing a new Nakba in the making. From your collective memory, maybe in UNRWA, do you think that this is the case? Do you see now that the situation is very similar to what happened in 1947 and 48? And my second question, what's going to happen to the displaced people in Gaza? Does your mandate cover them? Are you obliged to provide shelters to them? Are you thinking about establishing temporary camps inside Gaza Strip? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nabil, and great to see you. Look, to your first question, like I said in the briefing, we are seeing, especially since the 4th of November, and this is based on first-hand testimonials from our teams who were present on the ground south of what we call Wadi Gaza. They were there receiving an exodus of people, Nabil, a river of people who were forced to flee their homes since the 4th of November. And many of those people were elderly people who were very, very young in 1948. And they were reliving the trauma, and they were reliving the unhealed wounds, basically. And the younger generation, they were forced to live what their ancestors went through in 1948. And everybody arrived completely dehydrated, exhausted after being forced to walk for kilometers on end from Gaza City, mainly down south. So that's the situation that our colleagues relived. And for several of our colleagues who were forced to flee themselves, they said to us, including one colleague who works in the UNRWA archive, he said, when I saw the river of people, it was exactly the same photos from 1948, except this one was in color and the one from 1948 was in black and white. To your second question on what will happen to the displaced people. So every day we continue to receive more people who come and seek refuge, protection, and shelter under the UN flag in our facilities. So now we have 153 facilities across the Gaza Strip in the north, in the middle areas, and in the south. They're now being used to host 800,000 people. This is, like I said, way over what we had planned for, because we planned for only 150,000 as a worst case scenario. And people continue to come to our shelters, Palestine refugees and non-Palestine refugees alike, and we are receiving people as much as we can. Now, when things peaked during the first 10 days of the war, we had to open more shelters that were never designated to be used as shelters. We even had to open places like warehouses, which are not at all suitable for humans. And I visited the Rafah log base a few months ago, logistics space. It's a huge warehouse. In fact, one of the largest that the UN runs in the region, but it's a warehouse. So, but people came to this warehouse because they had no place to go and nowhere to go. So you'll see in the photos and the footage that we have is people sleeping on the floor because they had no other choice. And now this warehouse is home to 25,000 people. This is the very same place where 400 people have to share one toilet. And that's the situation in our shelters, Nabil. Thank you.
Thanks. Murad Hashim?
Thank you. Murad Hashim, Al Jazeera Arabic. My question to Juliette from UNRWA. On the 101 UNRWA staff who killed in this war, you said that they had nothing to do with this conflict. Do you know why they've been killed? Was that because of the random attacks? Have you tried to get answers from the Israeli on that?
Yeah, thanks, Murad. I'm very sorry to let you know that it's now 103 colleagues, and almost every single day is the most dreadful moment in my day when we get that list of the dead. And there's yet another one colleague or more who are added to that list. And like I said, we have to always remind ourselves that these are not just updates on a list. These are our colleagues and friends who were killed. They were killed in different circumstances. Some of them were killed while they were at home. Some of them were displaced, either in shelters or staying with families. 1/3 of those colleagues were not killed in the north. They were killed in the middle areas, and they were killed in the south. We don't know exactly the circumstances of how they were killed. And at the moment, we're not able to have more information on the circumstances. When the war is over, we'll be able to know more, not just about that, which is absolutely fundamental, but also about our facilities that were impacted. And the worry for us, Murad, now at UNRWA, is that because we lost contact with many of our staff, not just because of the blackout tonight, but in general, we have lost contact. I mean, a lot of our colleagues are unaccounted for. We worry that this number that the United Nations, that UNRWA was able to verify, we worry that this number is sadly likely to be much higher.
Thanks. Margaret Bashir?
Thank you, ladies, for the briefing. It's Margaret Bashir from Voice of America. To Abeer, if you get fuel, could some of the bakeries resume? And how much, if you have an idea, how much fuel does a bakery need to produce bread for a day, for instance? Like what kind of volume of fuel are we talking about? And to Juliette, the Israelis have ordered 4 towns in the south of Gaza to evacuate. There was heavy shelling overnight. How is that impacting your shelters in the south? I imagine some of them are in those 4 towns. So then what happens to those people? Because all your other shelters are already very crowded. I mean, how are you absorbing everybody that's being shuffled around and moved around? Thank you.
So first to Abeer for the question on the bakeries.
Absolutely. If we have fuel available, some of these bakeries that are still operating, still functional, can immediately produce bread. We have also the ability, we do have some wheat flour that's left that can be given to some of these bakeries and they can immediately be put to work. We can also prioritize wheat flour on the convoys that are going into Gaza. So, of course, if fuel is available, these bakeries would be immediately working. Whatever is left of them, I mean, some of them have sustained damage, but there are some that are still working. Even with the mills that are no longer operating, we still can mill and send wheat flour that's ready to be baked. In terms of the second part of your question, how much fuel, I wouldn't know that, but I can get back to you. I think it's the use of the fuel is to provide electricity for some of these bakeries. I will check exactly the exact amount and get back to you.
Okay, and then Juliette?
Yeah, thanks very much, Margaret. On the evacuation, yes, we have seen these reports. It's difficult for us now to know the situation on the ground, but it is highly expected that people will be displaced even more, and that our shelters will be even more crowded. I don't know the situation as of now, also because of the communication blackout, but we should know that should the communication is restored, we will have more information about that. Thanks for the question.
Thanks. First, we'll go to the screens to Pam Falk and then back to the room. Pam?
Yes, hi. Thank you both for the briefing. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. The question is for Juliette. Nice to see you again. What is this? What is the status of telecom? Totally out? I mean, we got some phone calls through, but is our cell working and internet not? And follow up on the evacuation question, where do the displaced go at this point? Back north to other areas in the south, to Egypt? What's the plan? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Pamela. On the telecoms, maybe just for background to you and the friends on this call, is this would be the 4th time that we're seeing a communications blackout in Gaza since the war began. If you recall, the first one was 24th of October when we had the longest one. It was for 36 hours. And look, when this happens, we lose contact with the vast majority of our teams on the ground. And for people in Gaza to have no communications, no internet, no WhatsApp, no messenger, no any means of communication, no phones, I mean, landlines, even forget about it, they were cut first in this war. They don't know who's dead and who's alive. They cannot call an ambulance, they cannot check in on their friends, on their family members. They're isolated from each other and from the rest of the world. And the sense of abandonment that people in Gaza have been going through for more than 16 years now, and that this war has further deepened, it strangles people. It really does. And plus, it's quite terrifying. So this would be the fourth time that this blackout has happened, and it can be patchy in some areas, and in some areas it can be not at all available. We have, for example, now one line of communications through the satellite phone that some of our colleagues have, but with the vast majority of our staff, we completely lost contact. Where would people go? I actually don't know. It's a very, very good question. And this is exactly what people in Gaza have been asking us. Where do I go now and what's next? And like I said, unlike in other crises and conflicts that you and I have worked on, including recently, people are trapped. They cannot leave the Gaza Strip. They are trapped.
Thank you.
Thanks. Benno Schwinghammer?
Thank you so much for the briefing, Benno Schwinghammer with the German press agency. My question is for Juliette. We did see the arms that have been seized by the Israeli army in the Al-Shifa hospital. From what you have seen, do you think that raid, now going on for a second night, I guess, is justified?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not a military expert. Neither do I work for a military organization, so I'm afraid I cannot comment on your question. Thanks.
Thanks. Kristen Salume?
Just to clarify a couple things and then a more general question. You said 70% of Gaza without water. Is that the whole of Gaza or just the south of Gaza?
The whole of Gaza.
All of Gaza. And then is there any way of knowing how many of your UNRWA staff are missing, or is there a number for the unaccounted for at this point, or is it too hard to say given is it hundreds?
No, I actually don't have that number on me, but I do know that we have many staff that are unaccounted for.
And then I'm wondering if you could respond to the Israeli ambassador to the UN who has accused UNRWA of being aligned with Hamas or having Hamas supporters in it. He called for UNRWA and the UN to get out of Gaza. What's your response when you hear that?
Yeah, look, I believe the comment was about our staff and specifically about our colleagues who were killed. Now look more practically, all UNRWA staff, all of them, 30,000 staff that we have, not only in Gaza, we have also operations in Syria and in Lebanon, in Jordan and in the West Bank, including in East Jerusalem. All those staff go through a scrutiny and screening process. And then they get on lists. And those lists, UNRWA shares with the host governments in the countries that I've just mentioned. And it also shares with Israel as the occupying power.
Okay. Yes, please.
Thanks. One more for Juliette. It's Caitlin Hu from CNN. Juliette, you mentioned UNRWA's operations being paralyzed, struggling to uphold its commitment to help the Palestinian people, and that this seemed like a deliberate tactic. do you have communications with the IDF or with Israel that suggest that it's deliberate? What makes you think that?
Thanks. We communicate with all parties to the conflict. This is a standard at the United Nations in any other conflict.
What makes you think that it's a deliberate strategy?
Because we have seen fuel and food and water and humanitarian assistance being used as a weapon of war. Because it has been 5 very, very, very long weeks where our colleagues are struggling to deliver assistance because there's been a lot of restrictions on the entry of humanitarian supplies, because it took from the 7th of October to the 21st of October so 2 weeks to bring in 1 truck of humanitarian assistance. And even when that happened, it was really a drop in the ocean in the face of the overwhelming humanitarian needs on the ground. Because the humanitarian operation, this humanitarian operation that started on the 21st of October, we believe it's geared to fail because of the cumbersome procedures and processes that are around these humanitarian operations. It's very, very complex.
Okay, we'll turn again to the screens for a second. Abdul Hamid Sayam.
This is Abdul Hamid Sayam from Arab. Juliette, I have also contact with Gaza, a friend there, they lost their lives. And I tell you that what I heard in the beginning, crisis, they said that when Israel asked for people to evacuate to the south, the first to leave was UNRWA. And if UNRWA did not leave, then people will be encouraged to stay. When they saw UNRWA evacuating and going to the south, then people were, became fearful of the consequences and they started leaving. So that's what my first question, and I have other.
Yeah, what is the question, Abdul Hamid?
Abdul Hamid, please ask the question.
I did ask.
What's the question?
Is the question, Abdul
They
Hamid?
said, what do you say to that? They said why UNRWA started to evacuate immediately. If they didn't evacuate, then the Palestinians might stay. Is that the case?
We did not evacuate. We relocated to the south. We had to move our center of operations from the Gaza city, where we have been present for more than 70 years, to the south. This is to allow us to continue to have communication and to continue to oversee the largest humanitarian operation in the Gaza Strip. What was your second question, Abdul Hamid?
Did that have any negative impact on the population?
We continued to deliver humanitarian assistance. This is why we are in Gaza, is to be present with the community and to deliver humanitarian assistance. So we relocated our center of operations from Gaza City to the south of the Gaza Strip so that we're able to continue to provide assistance to the Palestinian people in need.
And my second question, does UNRWA still have structure and hierarchy and those in charge, and you communicate with your staff, and just in this difficult time, do you still have kind of hierarchy in UNRWA people in Gaza?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Is there people in charge? There are some people who are working here and there, and there is somebody commandship of UNRWA who issues order and decide what to do today. Infrastructure, administrative infrastructure in Gaza.
So we have 13,000 staff, Abdul Hamid, in Gaza. The vast majority of those staff, more than half of them, were teachers in UNRWA schools. Now the schools are closed. We had to close the schools on the 7th of October when the war started. Many of our schools have been turned shelter. many of our teams on the ground who were doing other jobs like teachers have stood up to their humanitarian commitment and are now helping in the humanitarian response. We are the largest UN agency working in the Gaza Strip. We work very, very closely with other UN agencies like WFP and others. And we continue now to focus on delivering assistance to 800,000 people who are in our shelters. However, as of tonight, tomorrow morning, much of what we've been doing will sadly come to an end because we do not have the fuel we need to continue.
Okay, we have time for just a few more questions. First, you in the back, and then we'll go to Frank Cucciardo. Yes.
Thank you both for doing this briefing. My name is Majdi Yazaji with Sky News Arabia, and my question to Abeer. Abeer, I want to ask you about like baby milk powder. It seems like a luxurious commodity now. I know there's a huge scarcity when it comes for food and water. Bread is not there almost. It's totally out of the question. But yet, baby milk powder for infants, it's just like bread and water, so it's a necessity, though it looks like a luxurious commodity. Do we have any status when it comes for like numbers? Are these kind of baby milk powder are getting in for infants in Gaza? We know that there's a huge populations of kids and infants in Gaza when it comes for babies. What do we know about this? Thank you very much.
Baby food and baby milk powder is actually not part of the food basket that we provide in any of our operations worldwide, not in emergencies. It's not part of our expertise or what we do. I think probably that question should be better directed to UNICEF, but I can say that it's very important for us, of course, the provision of nutritious food to mothers so that they can nurse their children. But in this current situation, we're unable even to provide this very nutritious food to mothers so that they can, provide food for healthy babies. So it is actually something that I cannot address, but I would say that at this moment, the risks are high for pregnant, for nursing mothers, for babies, all across the board.
Okay, Frank Cucciardo.
Yes, hi, Frank Cucciardo from TRT World. Ms. Touma, I have a question for you, Juliette. Based on what you've been telling us today about the hardships that have been endured by your staff since the beginning of the war, and also the update you've given us on the deaths of 103 deaths to this point, do you believe the Israeli military has committed war crimes against your staff?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Look, we are not in a position at all at UNRWA to determine this. There are other entities in the United Nations whose job is exactly to determine this and do that. Thanks for the question.
Thanks. And Frank, just to reiterate our position that would have to be determined by an appropriate judicial body. And then we have time for one last question. Lenka White on screen.
Thank you very much for this briefing. Please, to Ms. Juliette, I was curious more on the telecommunication blackout. Are there any expectations of how long it can be for, and are you maybe talking to some companies? I know that SpaceX offered help with that. I don't know what is the status of the negotiations now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lenka. I wish I knew how long it will last, but all I can say is that we hope it will be for the shortest time possible so that people can continue to have communications. And no, I don't have an answer to your second question.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And with that, I'd like to thank once again Abeer Etefa and Juliette Touma. Thanks very much for your time and for your briefings. Good luck in the days ahead.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.